Well, Carol, the dark arts of voter suppression has deep history, and we know some of the basic outlines of it. You mentioned the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Let's go back before that, though. I think I would love to hear a primer on all of the classic methods of voter suppression, the sorts of strategies, devices, laws, restrictions, norms, threats that kept people, mostly Black people, from voting before 1965.
Oh, you have so hit my wheelhouse. And I'm going to take us to the Mississippi Plan of 1890 because we had the 15th Amendment in 1870 that said the state shall not abridge the right to vote on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. African Americans, African American men were registering to vote at just these enormous levels, 80 to 90% voter registration rates in the South. And as a massive economic downturn hit the United States, poor whites and poor Blacks began to work together politically to change the power structure in the US so that policymakers weren't just trying to figure out how to siphon off all of the dollars to the uber rich. Well, the Mississippi State Legislature looked at that and said, Lord, we got to stop this. And they came up with the Mississippi Plan of 1890 because they didn't want Black people to vote. But the 15th Amendment makes it really hard to write a law saying, we don't want Black people to vote. So they said, wait a minute, we got this. We know how to do this. We're going to take the societally imposed conditions on African Americans and make those conditions the access to the ballot box. And we're going to make it all sound legitimate. And so they created a series of policies. One was the poll tax. The language said, democracy is expensive. You know, you've got all of these elections. You have to have people taking the ballots, counting the ballots, places for the ballots to be. I mean, all of it is so. And so if you really believed in democracy, you would be willing to pay a small fee, a poll tax, to ensure that democracy ran smoothly. So you see right there in that rhetorical device, it puts the onus for valuing democracy on the individual and not on the state to run free and fair elections. First thing. Then the second thing in that is that after centuries of unpaid labor, followed by the Black codes, after the Civil War, which reinstalled slavery by another name, then followed by sharecropping, the access to income that the poll tax required was just impossible. And also because the poll tax required payment in cash. For sharecroppers who were paid later in the year, they didn't have cash when the poll tax was due. The poll tax, while sounding nominal, it's just a small fee, actually amounted to 2 to 6% of a Mississippi farm family's annual income.
Well, and on top of that, there's literacy tests of various creative kinds, right?
Exactly. I call it legislative evil genius because it said, okay, if the poll tax doesn't get them, the literacy test will. If the literacy test doesn't get them, the grandfather clause will. If the grandfather clause doesn't get them, the good character clause will. If the good character clause doesn't get them, the understanding clause will. So the Mississippi Plan is made up of a multitude of different policies.